Hi, Karl Sakas here, agency consultant, and welcome to Agency Office Hours for February 2021, sharing advice to help you grow your agency profitably, sponsored by Sakas & Company. We'll be answering a set of questions submitted in advance by agency owners and leaders all over the world. If you're interested in asking a future question, we may have some time at the end to answer your question, or include your question when you sign up for future events. You can sign up for any upcoming event at the Sakas & Company website. My colleague Kat will share the link for that so that you can get first dibs on requesting new questions and also getting the recording. Speaking of that, if you're listening live, you'll get the recording from today's event to the email you used to sign up within 24 hours. And if you're watching the recording, well, you already have the recording. As usual, we will be recording office hours today, so don't share anything in your questions that you don't want to become public, as we go. All right, and again, if you're joining live, feel free to introduce yourself in chat, where you're from, and what you're looking forward to about the coming month. So first up in Q&A is going to be Zach with a question about hiring. Zach, go ahead and take yourself off mute and can go ahead and come on screen. So Zach, hello and welcome.
Hi, thanks for taking my question.
Absolutely. Well, to paraphrase, Zach, you had asked about hiring. The paraphrase version would be, which role should my agency hire next? For everyone who's listening, it's a common question, a common situation, but of course, everyone's answer is unique. So Zach, if you could elaborate a bit more about your situation, and then we can figure out the right answer.
Yeah, so run a two-person content marketing agency. We're both writers, and we both just do a little bit of everything. We've been building up a portfolio of contractors we work with. And the guy, so I just joined last year. The founder started it a few years ago. And so we have this steady stream of referrals coming in, and it's getting to a point where two guys can't handle it anymore. Even with contractors, our contractors all have full-time jobs. We don't have any, regular freelancers with us. So turnaround time is
two owners plus 4 contractors currently. So 6 people overall.
Yeah, 4 or 5. Yeah, depending on what they ask us. So anyway, we're at a point right now where we're trying to think of, okay, how can we take some stuff off of our plate? And, like customer service, that's a big part of it, is client requests.
Right.
But also some creation, some of the implementation, like we do writing blogs, but publishing them, building campaigns, and then implementing those campaigns, tracking those campaigns, reporting on those campaigns. So a lot of those, that implementation, the reporting, feels like we could hand that off to somebody else. So we're at a point where we can sustain a full-time position.
Yeah.
Just to figure out what position makes the most sense.
Makes sense. Well, I have a model to help think about that. So for anyone who is listening along, I've just shared a slide with my 6 agency roles. If it's kind of small on screen, go ahead and switch from gallery view to speaker view so you can see things, a bit larger. And the idea, and Zach, to your specific question, you'd mentioned, for instance, people working with a client. That would be what I would think of as AM, the account manager. Their job is to keep the clients happy and be the voice of the client within the agency, and usually upsell clients on more work. You've also got project management, the person who's coordinating things internally. You have your subject matter experts, writers in particular, given your focus. But at agencies, that could also include people doing design, doing development, doing analysis, things like that. You also got the strategist role, which likely right now you and your business partner are primarily handling strategy around how can the client maximize their budget, get the best return on investment on the budget they have. Strategists are sort of like a special subject matter expert. There's a bit of account management. There's a bit of the highly billable SME work. But it tends to be kind of a broad experience skill set. You've also got biz dev, which is about marketing, sales, and partnership building. And finally, support, about operations and leadership. So for everyone who's listening along, you might be wondering, well, I'm doing all of that or doing bits of all of that. That's totally normal. depending on the size of your agency, you likely are doing at least 2 of them, maybe all 6 of them. Now, as you grow, eventually you'll probably narrow it down. Maybe you're doing 3, you'll get it to 2, or you're doing 2, you'll get it to 1. And it's important to know what you want to do. But, Zach, to your question about what next, it sounds like it's primarily a mix of account management and the writing side of subject matter expert. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think you're right. We're sort of toying with just like marketing coordinator, general job title like that. And we're thinking like 50% customer service, 50% content creation, implementation, tracking, just like everything else.
That makes sense. And, the part about, say, the reporting side of things, you could think, where does reporting fit in? There's a bit of a subject matter expert piece. There's also some from a project management standpoint, right? Depending, are they coordinating internally, getting the info you need from a reporting perspective? Now, the question is, who is that person and what's the right title? So, for instance, you could do a writer title, but many writers aren't expecting to also be doing all the reporting and all of the client interaction. On the other hand, if you hire someone with an account manager title, they may not necessarily be a great writer, or may not be writing at the level you would expect one of your freelance dedicated writers to be writing. And so I think the thing to consider, and this is true for any account management hire, they need to be good enough at the work. They're not an expert at everything the agency does, but they're good enough at getting it done in order to coordinate with everyone else. What's your thinking about the role? What would you say is good enough for this role?
Oh, that is an excellent question. I think what I'm interested in is somebody who is more interested in the marketing side of it than the customer service side of it. But the customer service is like the thing we need tomorrow. And the thing that we like, so we had some back and forth just about, okay, what is this position really? Is it a customer service position or a marketing position? And I feel like, well, to get the right person, I think we need to make it clear, like, this is an exciting marketing experience. You won't just be answering client complaints or questions or whatever all day long.
Yes. Though I would assume there will be a few client complaints, questions, and all to answer. So you don't want someone who's like, oh no, this client is unhappy, I don't want to deal with it. It's like, well, it's your job to deal with it in part. From what you've shared, I'm wondering if the right title might be something with coordinator in it, whether it's account coordinator, project coordinator, or marketing coordinator. It builds in the assumption that they're going to be coordinating with different people. The assumption is that they're not going to be writing all day long, but it's reasonable that they're going to have to do some, especially if it's a marketing coordinator role. If we think about what builds in the most assumption about writing, most a marketing coordinator, then account coordinator, probably the least for a project coordinator, though, a project coordinator at an agency of your current headcount is certainly going to be doing writing. Of the 3, seems like marketing coordinator might be the one, and then you would define it according to the percentages you discussed. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's kind of the direction we were leaning, and so that's helpful. That's very helpful.
Validation, it helps.
Yeah, just finding that person who has that unique combination of skills feels like the big hurdle now.
Yes, and I think you mentioned it looks like you will be able to hire someone full-time in the role. Is that correct?
Yes.
So that makes it easier. In a sense, we also have a question about what happens if you're hiring part-time, how to approach that. The ideal hire for almost any agency role is what someone I would describe as lightly disgruntled. That is, they're doing something similar at another agency now, and they feel not fully appreciated for their work. So they've done the work, they're presumably good at it, but their boss doesn't quite see the same career direction as the employee does. I've been that person. On my first job after college, I was giving various suggestions on how the company could improve things. And eventually, one of my bosses, I had two bosses, took me aside, Mike, the marketing director, and he said, Karl, I know you mean well, but just because you row the ship doesn't mean you get to steer. Which on one hand was terrible advice from a morale perspective. On the other hand, it was right for the company culture. They didn't want the suggestions. It's like, zip it. The ideal is someone who has good ideas, who wants to move up, but the company, for whatever reason, doesn't want them to. So lightly disgruntled, the key is you don't want them ideally to be heavily disgruntled because that tends to create its own problems.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, good luck. Zach, thank you for sharing the question. And certainly if people have anything they'd add, while we're here, if you have something you'd add on that, feel free to unmute yourself and share. Yeah. All right. Well, let's see. I think, Kat, I know we have the question from Camilla. It looks like she has not joined yet. So with that in mind, let's jump ahead. So we may come back to that question later. Jake, I know you mentioned you had a question. If you want to share that with Kat, and we can sort through potentially getting that in.
Awesome.
Cool. Let's jump ahead to Luke. Your question about marketing the agency itself. So we'll take a look, Luke, at your question. If you want to, go ahead and unmute yourself and come on camera. Well, you're already on camera, so there we go. Go ahead, Luke. Hello, thank you for joining.
Cool. Thank you so much. I appreciate the conversation there. Yeah. So just some context. I have been in the marketing world for many 8 to 10 years now. And finally this past year started off and recently started our own company. I've been doing freelance work here and there. And so we're just putting the formulation. So we're a baby agency, and which is very exciting and stressful all the same.
Yeah.
And so my question was really, obviously we're trying to, aside from referrals, start to build more market, just brand awareness. And my question to Karl was, as a newer agency, when is it better to kind of market yourself to the masses versus marketing to a specific market subset? And, I think additionally, as a newer agency, kind of tactics, tricks and tips and sort of setting that up. And I might be a little bit ahead of myself, but just wanted to get some guidance and other expertise on that.
Well, congrats on getting things launched. Sort of new business, but obviously lots of experience leading into it. And also, I found a lot of people in your situation. It's around the idea of, what have you seen other people do? Let's get it right. Let's do it better. That kind of thing. So it's a common path, but of course, always unique challenges in making it happen. So, we can think of the question as this. Should you specialize, or should you provide, a specialist approach in positioning, or more of a generalist approach? And either can work. And part of it's going to come down to what you want to do. And this is true for you, Luke, as well as anyone listening who's weighing that decision yourself. And if you're listening live on chat, would love if you shared, if you're more of a specialist, write specialist. If you're more of a generalist, write generalist in chat so we can see, who's joining today. I am a big fan of specializing because it makes a lot of things easier. But it is worth considering, what's the point of being a more generalist agency? One, it's helpful as you're getting started because you're sorting through which are the clients you want to work with. If you've worked with a wide range of client industries before, you may not have a particular one you want to focus on. For instance, one of my clients worked in the adventure tourism industry previously. And She likes the industry, so she knew from the beginning that's where she wanted to focus. That was sort of an easy decision for her. Another client focused on lawn and landscaping, on the client side, and that's where his agency focuses now. So in that sense, it's sort of an easy decision for them. Other people, though, it's more about, well, I could do anything. What should I do? And it is worth considering you can succeed as a generalist agency if you're focusing on a particular geographic area. If it's like people within a 1 hour drive kind of thing, that's an option. Another option is if you want lots of variety and you want something totally new every day, leaning more toward generalist can be a way to make that happen. I am a specialist and there is tons of variety. I mean, that's still there. But if you're like, I want to learn new industries every day, being a generalist can make sense. But before we take a look at the benefits of specializing, which I'm a big fan of, Luke, what's your reaction to some of the benefits of being on the generalist side of things?
Good and bad in a way.
Okay.
I think as I've gone into it, I've wanted to specialize more and more. Now, from specializing from a client industry perspective, hasn't necessarily been having that ideal customer profile be a specific industry is not necessarily something I've thought about. So that's more new and like, oh, maybe that is a good actual way to specialize. So if anything, it is even minute or specific client as well.
Sorry, you cut out on the last part there.
I was saying, if anything, it was sort of encouraging me more so to look at the specialization per client profile.
Yes. Well, let's take a look at that next. And it is worth considering that there's sort of an in-the-middle option. You could be more of a generalist agency that specializes horizontally in a particular technology, in a particular type of work, for instance, just social media, but for any industry, or just a particular content management system from a web development perspective, or marketing automation, or that kind of thing. That makes it easier to do the work, but it doesn't have the other benefits of industry specialization. So let's take a look at the industry specialization benefits, and then for everyone who's listening along, sort of deciding. I noticed, by the way, in chat, most people have identified, it's a mix. A number of, specialist, generalist, used to be more generalist, but have started specializing in the past 2 to 3 years. Generalist, but with a heavy focus, manufacturing, industrial, professional services. And, so we've got something for everyone here. So on the specialist side, usually I see people specializing by a particular client industry or up to maybe 3 industries, often related, sometimes not. And so the idea is that you're saying, we do such and such for this industry. And there are industry niches for everyone. For instance, my accountant previously had an office that was in the same building as the North Carolina Professional Loggers Association, like logging, like cutting down trees, lumber and all. And I noticed that they had publications like Southern Logger magazine. And, it's like that there's a trade publication for everything. There's Pizza Today, there's dental economics. There really is something for everyone. The nice thing about specializing is everything's easier. Your marketing is easier because you can say we focus on this. So when someone searches for Logging Industry Marketing Association, I'm not sure that's a good niche, but for instance, if you're the only one, you pop up. Or the examples I mentioned, the adventure travel agency or the lawn and landscape agency. I've worked with a client in the past who focused on commercial HVAC repair, like heating, ventilation. So not like at home, more like the $1 million machinery on top of commercial buildings kind of thing, which is pretty lucrative. So, marketing is easier because also in addition to just keywords, you can create content. The latest challenges in the XYZ industry. That's a lot easier. Sales is easier because when a client asks you, well, what other people in our industry have you worked with? The answer is everyone, or, something like that. In contrast, I worked at an agency that focused on mission-based organizations. And so there's a sort of a niche there, but it was more horizontal than vertical. And we got a not really mission-based client who showed up one day. It was a law firm. And they were like, well, how many other law firm websites have you made? And our salesperson basically had to be like, well, the answer was none. But his answer was like, well, we have experience working with a number of professional services firms. Here are a couple that we've worked on, sort of the politician answer, not exactly answering the question. In contrast, I have a client who does SEO for personal injury law firms, and he has tons of case study examples. And so, from a sales perspective, that makes things a lot easier. It's easier in delivery if you specialize by industry because you know the typical problems. For instance, if you focus on nonprofits, which is sort of a vertical, not exactly, but close enough. Nonprofits have quarterly board meetings. Their board of directors tends to be very involved in what's going on. They tend to have an executive director, for instance, rather than a CEO. Like, you can use the right language, that the board meeting is going to come up, that different things are likely to happen. You can also read their tax return, which is public information, at least in the US, kind of things like, what to expect delivery-wise and all that. I've chosen to focus as a specialist myself, so I only work with agencies, more specifically digitally oriented agencies under 100 people, and there's still plenty of variety. I've worked with, at this point, over 400 agencies in 36 countries. There's always something new. So, Luke, what's your reaction to the benefits of industry specialization?
Feels, I don't know about anyone else, but definitely feels like a lot of weight lifted in many ways. And I mean that in the way that most of my clientele has been industry focused. So, construction companies, automotive industry, people who, labor intensive, client facing, but they just are really good at their trade. So maybe even trade work. And I just never really realized that was where my clientele was, it's just like, oh, well, of course, why wouldn't you market there? That's where my niche of expertise and where organic growth, content, storytelling focus. And so those are industries typically where that's hard for those kinds of entrepreneurs or business owners. They're just focused on gaining more capital and not really telling the story along the way. And they
need your help. A key is, of course, do they want your help? If we think about need versus want, everyone needs our help. Not everyone wants to pay for it.
Sure.
But there's also another opportunity built in to focusing on trades, whether it's home services or commercial services. You could look at it from different angles. On one hand, there's tons of competition on the business to consumer side. From a search perspective, you're competing in what I would call fortress SERPs. So they're like fortress hubs where one airline controls a majority of the flights, and so they raise the prices because they have a near monopoly. So like American Airlines in Dallas, Delta Airlines in Atlanta, United in Houston, that kind of thing, or British Airways in London Heathrow, that kind of deal. So you're competing with highly funded competitors like, Yelp and Angie's List and Thumbtack and things like that. On the other hand, if you can find ways to break through, you're ranking ahead of all these other people, all of your clients' competitors. So on the other hand, if you focus on the commercial side, it's a bit of a different story. It's not exactly the same. So that's worth considering. It's also worth considering, the value of one deal to the client. For instance, a colleague is in the midst of, renovation. The plumber, it turns out, charged $275 an hour. That seems like a pretty pricey plumber, but you know what? If they're good at what they do and you need them and all that, you'll pay that. But hopefully she's not going to be rehiring the plumber like every week. On the other hand, on the commercial side, if you're doing plumbing and commercial, if you're working with like hotel chains, there are a lot of opportunities there, or, you know, the franchisee who owns several, or that kind of thing. So you still need to decide which industry to focus on. And do keep in mind that if you're trying to juggle more than one at once, that basically means you're going to have to do marketing for more than one at once, which many agencies struggle with that, you know, just marketing one industry. So that's sort of a caution there. Luke, any other questions as we, you know, as you sort through what to do next?
I don't necessarily think so. My brain's already now just kind of whirling around different positioning, different marketing toward industries that we're already working with. And I think this was really good because it's not necessarily the way that I was thinking about asking the question, but it helped kind of pinpoint that ideal customer profile that I've been putting off for a while. So,
well, hopefully this is the nudge. You know, come back to office hours next month and let us know how it went. One other thing to keep in mind, you know, people ask, can it shift over time? Yes, it's probably not going to shift every quarter or every year. But I was working with a client who was focused on professional services, and they were sort of sorting through some changes. And I asked in one of our executive coaching calls, I asked, you know, if you were to make a list of your 5 best clients, best is relative, but ultimately it's like, okay, kind of a mix of highest budget and also profitable, and you enjoy working with, and, you know, there's sort of long-term potential in the industry. What are your top 5? And he thought through, and he, you know, quickly came up with the first 4, and then he thought, okay, yeah, here's the number 5. The interesting thing is that not one of them was in professional services, his professed niche. And we found that he actually had a new niche in a different area with clients he liked working with, and, you know, that had budget and things like that. And so ultimately he ended up targeting both professional services and the other side of things. And that's been a strong growth area for him. So it's okay if it changes. Ideally, don't change it constantly, because then you're not going to get any traction. Cool. Well, Luke, thank you for sharing. Thanks for everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You know, Maria and Zach for sharing in chat about you know, about your experience. And if anyone else wants to share as well, how you picked your specialization, if you specialized, feel free to chime in and share that in chat. So what's next? Well, coming up, we're going to answer, you know, Kat, thanks for sharing, Jake, the questions you shared. And then we also have an anonymous question about how to vet sales leads without being obnoxious. You don't want to be that person. I'll share how to not be that person. So let's do this. I'm going to answer the anonymous question on vetting first, and then Jake will get to your questions right after that, because I see we have a couple that'll give us a little more time to answer the questions. But first, a word from our sponsor, me. Today's event is sponsored by Sakas & Company, helping you grow your agency profitably. I have a tip for you instead of, you know, more of a promo. So in my executive coaching program, it's a one-on-one coaching program. I help agency owners set SMART goals to help move toward long-term progress toward their long-term goals. What can they do in the next month? SMART, as you probably have heard, is an acronym. S.M.A.R.T, specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and time-bound. So here's my bonus free tip, thanks to Sakas & Company. If you've assigned something out and you weren't happy with the results, take a look at SMART to see if something may have been missing along the way. Odds are at least one of the initials may not have been all there. For instance, maybe you weren't specific, S, about the ideal outcome. Maybe the person who's doing it wasn't really sure what done looked like, what that meant. Maybe there wasn't a quantifiable, measurable M target. Maybe they didn't know, you know, not just what done looked like, but like how much, you know, what was the situation there? Maybe you weren't clear on who is assigned to do it, A. You know, it could be that maybe two people thought they were doing it. Maybe no one thought they were doing it. Maybe someone thought that it was sort of a nice to have, but not a priority. Be clear on the assignment bit. Maybe the goal wasn't realistic, R in SMART. It wasn't realistic and it was never going to work in the first place. For instance, a client who is like, hey, I'm going to create a dashboard from scratch for my agency in the next month. That was the initial goal they wanted to set in our executive coaching call. I was like, dashboard makes sense, but I don't know if you're going to go from 0 to full dashboard in just a month, right? And so instead, we narrowed it down. And the more realistic one was that they would meet with their leadership team and figure out what the metrics should be. So that was going to be a realistic goal. And then they would set a follow-up goal and actually building the dashboard after that. And finally, if you've been working on some things and things didn't go as you expected, maybe the challenge was around time bound. Maybe there wasn't a specific deadline, or the team wasn't clear that that was the specific deadline. Worked with a client who had a challenge where he would share something with the team and then people wouldn't follow what he had said to do. And I said, oh, well, how did you approach sharing it? And turns out he mentioned it once. It's like, well, if you mention it once and people don't work on it again, it's because they didn't realize it was a priority. But also, realize that he was often kind of joking about other things. People didn't realize when he said he needed it by next Friday, he wasn't joking. He was being serious. So we talked about how he can communicate that, and he's gotten better results since then. So again, if you're struggling, the Sakas and Company executive coaching tip is make sure you're creating SMART goals, S-M-A-R-T, and Kat has shared in chat the article on that. All right, so next up, we're going to answer the anonymous question related to vetting leads, and then Jake, looking forward to answering your live questions. So vetting leads. The question was this. The question was, in sales process and business development, how do you go about vetting leads without being obnoxious? Do you use a contact form? Do you do something else? Basically, the agency leader was trying to create what I would call a fast-fail sales process. How do you know as quickly as possible if someone is a match? And if they're not, figure that out as soon as possible. Well, certainly just thinking about fast-fail already makes a lot of sense because ultimately, life is too short to waste time on potential sales prospects who don't need your help, don't want your help, don't want to pay for it, or may not be ready to buy right now. So the idea of the fast-fail sales process, as I share in my article on that, and Kat has shared that in chat, is think of a tiered process where you're trying to dig in, is someone a match or not? So for instance, part of my sales process is if someone reaches out, and basically all of my sales inquiries are inbound, someone reaches out to me. If things are generally a fit, I or my colleague Kat will confirm that and then recommend completing my pre-intake questionnaire. It's fairly short, takes about 15 minutes, and people share about where they've been, where they are now, and where they want to go. Based on the responses, which take people about 15 minutes or so, I'm usually 80% sure if someone is a match or not. If someone's clearly not a match, I'll point them elsewhere rather than wasting their time with a call if things aren't a fit. More often, because my positioning is pretty clear, things likely are a fit. So now it makes sense to do an exploratory call. Great. So, okay, they get through the pre-questionnaire. We do the exploratory call. Let people schedule that themselves via Calendly rather than going back and forth or putting a bunch of calendar holds. You can also see how fast, if you use self-scheduling for your sales calls, you can see how fast do people schedule the call. Sometimes you might think someone is super interested and you want to schedule a call with them tomorrow. If you let them self-schedule, they might pick something a week or two away, maybe a month away. Let people vote with their feet on how important it is. That's going to be important. Sometimes people ask, should I do a pre-questionnaire? And we link to that in chat. Should I do that if it's a referral, if someone has referred this person to us? My answer, yes. Still do the pre-questionnaire if it's a referral. Why? Well, just because it's a referral doesn't mean it's actually a good fit. thinking about some of my experience being set up on, blind dates. Just because the friend thinks we're a match doesn't mean we're actually a match. So you still want to do some screening, and you know what? You just frame it as part of your process, right? This is part of how you work, and you want to respect their time, and of course your time as well, to sort out, what's a match. And by the way, if people reach out and they're not a fit, that's an opportunity for you to build your partner relationships. In the agency roles, I talked about the biz dev role, marketing, sales, and partnerships. Partnerships is an untapped opportunity for many agencies around building partnerships with other agencies, with technology platforms, with others. Just because someone's not a good fit for you doesn't mean there may not be a good fit for someone else. On the personal life side of this, as you may have heard, I volunteer as a bartender on an antique train, and I had a passenger about a decade ago who was almost 80 years old, and his first wife had died about a decade earlier, and he basically described doing the seniors version of online dating. He said, at the time, at the age of 70, which, I mean, is that really a senior? Well, anyway, he was certainly by 79. He said, I went on dates with 12 women in 8 states. And I was like, wow, that's dedication. And he said, when you're my age, you don't waste any time. He was traveling with his second wife. He was, I think, her third husband. They had actually met through a referral. He had gone on a date with one of the 12 women in 8 states. And apparently she said, I don't think he's for me, but you might like him. And now a decade later, it worked. So the power of referrals can be a win-win-win for everyone. So, I'm curious, but before we go on to Jake's questions, for everyone who's listening live, any questions about applying that advice to help you vet your agency's sales prospects? And also, is there anything you do? Go ahead.
It was just, I'm pretty sure now I know why a lot of my referrals failed. So I did not do the pre-screening. So
it's okay. Now you know.
Thank you for that.
Now you know.
Yeah.
I think my question would be, I think most of our referrals who fail at the budget phase. Once we get to the point where we finally send over the estimate,
yes,
is there a way to front load that question without saying, how much are you willing to spend?
How much you got? I don't recommend asking exactly as how much you got, but there are ways to approach that. So I do ask about budget in the pre-intake. So someone has reached out. It seems like generally a match to move forward, but before the call, do the pre-intake. And the way I frame it is, do you have a target budget in mind? And then I volunteer some information about ranges. For instance, I know that if people are looking for boutique comprehensive help, that's typically $30,000 US per year. If you're looking at executive coaching, here's the pricing on that. But I have options anywhere from $1,000 to $50,000 plus. So if someone's like, I've got $5,000, well, I have an option. It's not doing a year of executive coaching, but there are options to fit. So the idea there is to give people an idea of the range. So for instance, at one of the agencies, we were getting all of these kind of junky sales inquiries on our contact form on the website. And I made a small but powerful change. I said, our website projects start at $75,000 and our user research projects start at $35,000. Overnight, we eliminated the bad inquiries, or bad for us. They weren't qualified based on budget. And so, sort of the sooner you either ask about budget or at least set a baseline talking about the budget, the easier it is to screen out people who aren't a fit. I've also found when you share a general minimum or range, if someone's target is below that, they'll usually volunteer it. They'll be like, oh, I was hoping, more like this. The other thing to do, if you don't want to ask directly about their target budget, the other thing to do is to say, have you created a budget for this yet? That's sort of a safer question for them to answer than what is your budget? But here's the thing. If someone reaches out to you and you ask, have you created a budget for this yet? And they say no, do not create a proposal for them. If they haven't created a budget yet, do not invest the time in creating a proposal. Instead, give them a really big range. So for instance, I was working with a client in Colorado that did custom app development. And so they would get these inquiries from people who didn't know necessarily how much the app should cost, mostly web apps. And, they're like, well, what do I do when they don't have a budget? I said, well, give them a huge range. So in their case, they could say something like this, thanks for reaching out. Once you have a budget, we can dig deeper in creating a proposal. But to manage your expectations, clients typically invest between $50,000 and $250,000 plus in the project. Is that in line with what you were expecting? Clients either say, ooh, I was looking for more like, 15,000. Okay, great. They're not a match. They might say, yeah, that's in line. Probably closer to 50 than 250, but, sort of it depends. You want to get some insights from the prospective client before you build a proposal. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Cool. And on chat, if anyone has any screening questions they enjoy asking, feel free to share that. But just keep in mind, given the nature of agency work, like in my coaching consulting, people usually have not created a budget, so I don't ask that specifically. Like when we've worked together, they create a budget because we'll be working together. But for agency related work, whether you're doing marketing or design or development or content, your client should have a budget. They're getting paid to do it, so should you. And if they're not sure and they're trying to figure it out, give them a big range and you can help them further once it's nailed down.
My recent learning on that was to make the high end of that range way more than I think the project probably will be.
Yes.
So that their expectation of that kind of moves toward the middle as opposed to on the lower end of all of that.
Absolutely. That's ultimately anchoring. It helps, to anchor high and, pricing psychology, anchor high and whatever you quote seems lower relatively. And you're ultimately defining what the options are. So Bet, glad to hear that that's worked out well on that. All right, excellent. Well, Jake, you are up. And I understand you have a couple questions. How can I help?
Okay, so it's really frustrating. I never saw my company as a marketing company. Our goal was always, I always said, we do production for marketers. Okay. And our metric of success is I need to make sure every client I work for gets promoted. That's our little metric for success.
Yes.
However, when we talk about price, I really did not see myself in this life situation. Yeah. I usually look at things as how much does it cost to produce something. So we do production, and I notice brilliant marketers. They would always say, Jake, you just don't get it. You don't get it. And of course, my ego's like, bad words. But there's a differentiation, I think, between talking about price, and every marketer that's great has told me you need to talk about your added value. Now, we do production for great marketers, but I'm not gonna go out and say, hey, I can assure you that your marketing will explode or anything like that. I just focus on upholding their brand values, and we try to keep that accurate. But when we talk about price, it feels very embarrassing to me. I almost never want to talk about it. So how do I go about value proposition towards a marketer? It seems really hard.
Talking about money is a challenge for most people. I don't think it comes naturally to most, so that's normal. The challenge, of course, is that the person who talks about money first tends to control what happens next, right? So we could think of it as three tiers, right? We've got cost at the bottom. Like, what does it cost you to do the work? Either you're outsourcing it to a freelancer, or you're paying people that are on salary, or, you know, working with you otherwise. You've got cost. Then there's price, what you're charging for it. And then finally there's value, right? So cost, price, value. Now, you know, why do people hire you? Well, they're primarily looking for the value they get at the end of the day. Of course, they'll pay you the price. Now, the price and the value needs to be higher than the price for them to feel like it's a good deal. And the odds of reaching that value need to be secure enough that they feel like the premium, the value premium, is worth it. But of course, you are meanwhile thinking below the price, between cost and price.
Yeah.
And ideally, you're thinking about value as well. But you're like, we need to do this profitably. So we need to charge more than we're paying for it. You know, when you work with a salary-based team, you're basically buying the team's hours for wholesale and you're selling it for retail, right? You're marketing up. You know, ideally, you're at least tripling whatever you pay employees when you bill your clients. And if they're contractors, you're ideally at least doubling it. More is okay. But, you know, those are some general relationships to consider. And Beth, thank you for sharing on chat. I've recommended the book Overcoming Under-Earning. I'd recommend checking that out. But both Jake, you and everyone listening, if you haven't read it yet, Overcoming Under-Earning. Basically, it will help you feel more confident about paying yourself more as an agency owner and charging clients more, of like, you're worth it. You're worth it. So Overcoming Under-Earning, powerful book. My own coach recommended it, and I went out and raised my salary in the business like 40%. So powerful stuff. A client did it. I recommended it to her, and she raised her salary 50%. That's worth looking. But what's your reaction? We'll dig in a little bit. But Jake, what's your reaction to the idea of cost, price, and value?
I'm a good listener, but I'm a slow learner. I'm not sure what the difference is between cost and price. I am very sure what the difference is between price and value, but understanding what the added value is, it's just a difficult thing for me to do. I don't have that brain swag. So
yeah,
if you could help me understand cost and price, the difference, I think that would help me understand what value is.
So the cost is internally facing to you. That's like the money you are paying to fulfill the work. And if you're involved in it, you're ideally including your time as well. And if we think of it, as an agency owner, ideally agency owners and leaders are doing what I would call $1,000 an hour activities, things that only you could do. Building partnerships with referral partners, taking, your best client to lunch, or maybe Zoom lunch these days, which sounds terrible. Actually, you're like watching each other eat or something. Zoom coffee or drinks that might work. And maybe, send them something that they can work on. But on the other hand, like loading your expense report, someone else could do that at a lower cost to you. So cost is ultimately what are you paying your team and what are you paying yourself to fulfill the work? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Price is what you charge the clients. So by definition, price needs to be higher than cost, or else you're losing money. There may be some cases where you choose to make, less incremental profit. In some cases, I don't recommend losing money. I think there's an old joke of like, we're losing money on every unit. Yeah, but we'll make it up in volume. That doesn't work, because that means you're just losing even more money every time you sell more of something. So cost is what you're paying. So at a minimum, your price needs to provide profits on top of the cost. But ideally, the price is also, more than just cost plus a margin. Ideally, you're delivering work that clients want and are happy to pay lots of money for that work. What's your reaction to that, Jake?
I I understand the differences.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things I'll have to think about.
Yeah.
And then I think for value, as somebody who's not a marketer, but I absolutely think that I love marketers because I think that they're like the creative people who create demand in this world. And I think they're
Yes.
very important. And they help me enjoy what I do, which is media production and things like that, animation videos.
Yeah.
When we're thinking about value, do marketers guarantee to other clients, I'm going to guarantee you X amount of views or sales funnel or things like that? I can't imagine myself confidently saying, hey, this is the value it's going to give.
Right.
So how do people even think about the added value when they're talking to others? How does
this is one of the benefits to focusing on particular industries, because you can know different benchmarks in that industry because you're focused there. So for instance, I only work with agencies, and one of my core metrics, and Kat, if you could share the link to this on the revenue per FTE article. The idea is that if you want to look at how productive an agency is, take a look at the services revenue, divided it by the full-time equivalent. If someone's full-time, they're one. If they're half-time, it's a half, that kind of thing. Services revenue per full-time equivalent. That'll give you the average annual billables per person at the agency. If you're a generalist agency, that's at least $150,000 a year, US dollars, or converted to relevant currency. Or if you're a specialist, at least $200,000 per year. And Kat has just shared that article. Now, I know that my work will do a number of things, but one of the core things is to improve the revenue per FTE, the per capita billables metric. So, for instance, worked with an agency where they'd reached out and they had, I think, about 40 employees, and they were currently getting, I think they were at about 100,000. They were a generalist agency, and it should have been 150. There's a 50,000 a year gap with the team they have. That's work they could deliver without having to hire anyone new. Eventually, they'd need to hire some additional people, but theoretically, 50,000 times 40 people. There is a $2 million revenue gap. They were losing the potential to deliver an extra $2 million of work with the team they had based on their low productivity. And so ultimately, my work could focus on closing that gap. And so the question could be, what would you do with an extra $2 million a year in gross profits? And it was, between the two owners, and would have been split out. But you know what? Even after taxes and expenses to fulfill things, it basically translated to, say, $500,000 a year in profits for each of the two owners. So that then when my proposal for the project was like $40,000 or $50,000, that's a small fraction of the benefits they'd make. Does that make sense? That was the gap between the price and the value.
Okay. So a value is kind of a possibility.
Yes. And people will pay more for a sure thing in value versus, I don't know, it might work. The case when people will pay for something that are very low odds, or if the potential value payoff is enormous. So like a lottery ticket.
I see.
$1 or $5 or whatever for a lottery ticket. I mean, the odds are very low, but if you're getting millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, it seems worth it. I mean, the odds aren't, of course, very good, but it's the perception. It's the perception of that. So does that help, Jake?
Yeah, I think so. I'll have to think about it more, but it is a great start.
Awesome. Well, come back next month. Let us know how it goes. And certainly for anyone who's listening, if you are getting my newsletter, email newsletter, you will get updates on all kinds of things. Maria, I saw you had a question related to paid discovery. Let's do a lightning round. Maria, if you want to ask your question as we wrap up today.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, like with the paid discovery, when should they pay 50% at the beginning and 50 at the end, or pay in full at the beginning, or do you just invoice at the end of it all?
Up to you. I do recommend getting at least some money down. So either doing 100% in advance, or you could say 50% to book the engagement and the remaining 50% when you deliver it.
Okay.
I do recommend having, depending on how you structure it, some sort of initial conversation / getting the data in. You probably need to do at least one call to discuss it. And then when you deliver whatever it is, whether it's an audit, an analysis, a plan, you probably want to plan on a call to discuss it.
Right.
My recommendation would be if it's a second milestone, make the milestone due when you deliver it, but then you'll still do the Q&A call. The Q&A call is also to sell them on follow-on work, but the clock starts ticking when you deliver it.
Okay.
With that in mind, thinking about your paid discovery, which seems like the right approach? Like all in advance or like 50-50?
I'm comfortable with 50-50 just because, but I don't know what anybody else would do, but it's hard to say.
And the nice thing is that if a prospect pushes back on it, you can say, well, that's our policy, because it is your policy. You get to make the rules. And you always have the option of relaxing that. So, depending, you could choose to say, well, normally our policy is this, but, we want to help you out, so we're willing to make an exception. But make sure that the invoice or the receipt or, auto pay receipt or what have you notes that this is an exception. Said, normally it's due 100% in advance. We are making a special exception and, doing it 50-50. You also, for everyone who's listening, you also want to do that when you give a discount to someone. So like make sure the invoice lists the full price and then there's a deduction for what what you're discounting. So that way, in the future, they're like, well, why wasn't it whatever? You can point back to the invoice and note they got a strategically free or strategically discounted, not secretly free situation.
That's great. Thank you.
Cool. Absolutely. Well, Maria, thank you for sharing, and thank you for everyone who joined today. We take questions every month, the second Tuesday of every month, free of charge. If you have questions you want to ask and you want to ask them in advance, go ahead and submit them when you RSVP. I'll review them with my team to find a mix of questions to reflect the group as a whole. And as we saw today, sometimes there's even time to answer more questions on the fly. If you'd like to get ongoing tips, make sure you get my newsletter for agency leaders at sakasandcompany.com, SAKASAND company.com/newsletter. And I look forward to seeing you at future office hours. Karl Sakas here, agency consultant. Thanks for joining. And if you'd like one-on-one help, feel free to reach out. Either way, thank you and good luck out there.